Welcome back to my channel. Honestly, I don't have any idea when in the previous series when I demonstrated all my books by Anastasia Koldareva, I totally forgot about the best book which I own about When Dragon Dreams. I prepared it, I put it closer to my working table and I totally forgot to include it into this video. So let's start the next series from the dragons which I colored in this book. And here we have this underwater dragon. I'm quite proud of it, mostly because I do love this background. I'm not sure if it's visible, but it actually has quite creative watercolor background. I think that it actually looks like water. I used different shades of green and I tried to use more bright yellow green than natural green, a little bit of bluish green. So the water, even if the main color is green, still has some additional coloring accents. This paper, it's not 100% perfect for watercolor. Usually when you start to blend, you can have some stains, or maybe one color doesn't flow into another without any problems. But for smaller areas you can work with the watercolors, and I think that for the watercolor background, even such stains, they can be like water. So here I do love the background, and from the beginning I knew that I want to use on the scales of the dragon contrast between some golden scales. Very conveniently there were two types of the scales along the back, along the neck, and the rest of the body I wanted to do in this interesting color palette of blue, violet, turquoise, and again with a little bit of golden shining on some of the scales to make connection between two types of the scales. I think that it really worked well. Then I added fishes to add some bright accents here, so probably it's one of my best works here. Here I used watercolors, and for the rest I used polychromases. This one I believe that I mostly did with Prismacolors. Maybe I used some Derwent drawings because I definitely can recognize some muted colors, or maybe I just used various grays from Prismacolors. Anyway, this video is available on my channel, so if you have this book and if you want to color together with me, I will try to leave a link. Here I do love the dragon. Again, I tried to show that on each of the scales we have highlights, we have reflections of other colors, so even if the main color is gray-green, I also added a lot of golden reflections on each of the scales. I do love the shape which Anastasia did on these flowers, very beautiful cacti flowers, and I selected pink for them. I decided that it would be nice looking together with the body of the dragon. Also here on the smaller scales you can find a little bit of dark purple, a little bit of gold and green colors. I'm not sure that I managed to color these parts of the background. I thought that maybe it's part of the old wood, almost ruined, and that's why I selected this very intense brown color with a lot of black, so I hope that it would create some contrast. I don't know, it's not bad, maybe just too intense, but still I do love this one. The only thing I wish is that I outlined pink flowers with Posca. Maybe it would be more realistic looking, more like real paintings, but I remember probably at that moment I didn't have matching color of Posca, I only had white, so probably that was the reason why I decided to stay with such a look of the page. Well, here you can see totally different color palette, and it was challenging for me. Usually you know that I tend to use a lot of very bright, intense colors, but here I deliberately tried to stay in more uh, light pastel colors. So on the body of the dragon I added a little bit of markers first. I hope that it will help me to create this very light beige grey texture along the almost white neck together with a very light pink. And then on the body and on the shell I started to work with Prismacolors. I think that you can easily recognize all those beige, peach beige, then salmon pink colors, and of course French grey from Prismacolor set. Again, I will leave you a link to this video because maybe some elements they can be interesting for you. I do love that I added a little bit of red, at least some bright elements here on the succulent plants, and plenty of other smaller shells, snails around. I remember that it was interesting to look at the tail and trying to imagine which parts will be more shiny, which where the tail is slightly curved, or where it's laying on the ground, where I need to put shadows. I hope that it looks more or less three-dimensional. I remember that I did the background on the last step. Usually I prefer to start from the background. And here the background was very challenging because honestly I had no idea of what to do. Everything was ready. I realized that any intense background would be very distracting. I was thinking about plain black background. You know that black acrylic it's always a lifesaver for the backgrounds when you messed up something. So I decided that first I will try to do something with light Prismacolors, and if I don't like the final look then I will simply cover it with black background and it will be okay. But I think that this strange lines which I added, maybe like plants, maybe like rays of light, I don't know, but they somehow matched the main image, mostly because I used similar colors here on the ground, on the sand maybe, and here, and this matching blue-gray color. So the whole palette of the page is quite pleasant and slightly unusual for me. Next one I finished recently, last month. Here I used watercolors for the background and polychromos pencils for the rest of the page. This time I decided that background as the most tricky part I will be doing in the first line, and indeed when I started to do background I loved the upper part, but on the first version I did a very bright sand background here and somehow it didn't match the upper part, so contrast was too strong. I was thinking that maybe it could be a good idea that dragon is laying on the sand, but probably I selected too bright yellow ochre color. In the end I did second layer covering it with a little bit of green, then even with violet, and in such a way when color of the ground started to be less bright, more muted, it somehow merged better with the color of the rest of the background, and then I was ready to start doing the dragon and the baby dragon. I knew that I want to try this color combo of turquoise blue, violet, and as a contrast with all those pink, magenta, and even a little bit of yellow. So color combo which I selected was quite complicated. And actually it was relatively easy to do, apart from the moment when I started to think which colors to select for the baby. Of course it had to have similar to the mother's colors, but behind we already have part of the blue green body, so for the baby I decided to use only all those pink and magenta and bigger amount of yellow, and in such way to attract attention and to show that still it's her baby because they have similar colors. I think that in the end everything worked pretty well. They definitely are a loving pair of mother and baby, and that's exactly what I wanted to show on this page. Well, it's strange, I think that they also have smaller dragons, but probably they are somewhere on this page. That's one and only page which I mostly did with markers. You can see that I decided that, okay, I can ruin this page maybe as an exception. The rest of the smaller dragon I do love, but here I really wanted to practice coloring with alcohol markers, so I decided that it's okay if I would ruin the back of the page. Anyway, I think that here the color palette is quite pleasant. I used watercolor in various quinacridone gold, warm grey, almost orange colors for the background, and then less intense colors for the succulent leaves, making good contrast with the warm grey and blue grey, maybe even green, no, blue grey color here for the color accents. I think that strange, but the trunk of the succulent is probably the best thing here. And then I wanted to do this dragon which won't have any black lines. It looks like it's made from glass probably. That's why I wanted to add a lot of white highlights, also those golden accents and reflections on his body. So it's again a mix of colors. Probably my favorite color combo for dragons is blue plus a little bit of violet. I use it a lot, and now I think that it's always my first thought when I see the dragon, this color combo. Only then I try to step out of my comfort zone and to find some new colors for my dragons, because I color them relatively frequently and I need to invent new color combos for dragons. Anyway, this one I do love, so I'm pleased with the final look of it. Another page which I am extremely proud of is this shell dragon probably. Again, I did a watercolor background. You can see that it's far from perfect, some stains. I simply used two shades of more quinacridone magenta and pink colors, so the difference between two colors isn't that big, but still there are some stains where one color flow into another, but still for such kind of the background I don't think that it's worsened the look of the background. And then for the shell and for the dragon I used various pencils. Again, I will try to leave you a link because maybe this coloring will be interesting for you. And I do love that we have a very bright dragon. Finally, you can see that I used unusual color combo and I do love how everything looks. Again, I tried to use not only a main dark magenta color for the dragon, it's even like caput mortuum color, but I also added those yellow highlights, and I do love how I did these spikes along the back, very colorful and in the same time matching the whole color palette here. I deliberately used this very bright canary yellow to attract more attention to the dragon. On the shell I used much more subdued and light colors, but still it has some interesting elements because apart from the basic color of beige and brown, here along the central part we can see again a little bit of blue, a little bit of violet. You know that on the pearl surfaces we can very frequently see other colors, so if we look at real pearl surface there are sometimes pink, sometimes lavender, grey, blue, and that's what I try to show here on the huge shell. I remember that I almost missed that here we have the tail of the dragon, so I had to save the page a little bit when I realized that still here we have the tail, but otherwise it was quite pleasant coloring and I really treasure this page. Next we have this tiny coloring, which I did only because I wanted to practice some color combos on the liths. Here they are called living stones, quite interesting plants, And I think that the baby dragon here was quite adorable on the Anastasia drawing, so I decided to do it. I think that I used Prismacolors. That's probably... Oh, no. There is also another spread, of course. Here I used various media when I just got the book, and here I used watercolor without problems, because on smaller images, when you don't have to cover the whole background with watercolor, they work here on this paper really well. And along the back of the dragon I even added second layer of pearl watercolors, so it's shiny and magical looking. It's turquoise, then more yellow-green, and also lavender. Looks really lovely in real life. Now I would prefer to use lesser amount of colors for the shells here, but still, because of the intense colors on the dragon's body, it's definitely the focal point of this page. And I have another one which I did as one of the smaller projects. Sometimes you know that I love to do them. And here I think that it's also not bad. I think that I used Prismacolors probably. I definitely can see Prismacolors here on the shells. That's why I decided to do it, because I wanted to practice more on the shells. I planned to do bigger page in Clara Markova, but then I didn't have time for the bigger shell picture, but at least I finished this one. And another one where I tested how watercolors work, how Prismacolors work on this paper. For all the pencils, this paper is good. Well, I am glad that I didn't forget about this book. I was so surprised when I started to look at the video yesterday when I filmed all the books by Anastasia Koldareva, and I realized that I actually missed the one where I did the biggest amount of pictures. And now, if we started from dragons, maybe we can move to the game of Thrones. I have two Game of Thrones book and this one official coloring book. It was one of my first coloring books. You can see that I have Ukrainian edition. When I just started to color, of course, I went to our bookshops trying to discover if we actually have some coloring books here. I was very disappointed because we had only book by Johanna Basford's book by Millie Marotta, but then I found this treasure, and surprisingly book was quite good, and paper in the book allows to work with watercolor. So in this book I have some of my earliest works. You will see a big difference in my coloring style, at least I hope that you will see it. So I don't know, maybe let's start from the beginning. Here are my first steps in coloring, and I used everything. I used watercolor for the background here, I used Derwent color softs, I used my budget Faber-Castell Eco pencils. So I experimented. I didn't know how properly do textures. It was helpful that already we have this wooden texture and a little bit of shading on the metal parts, so I mostly worked on colors, not too much on the real textures. Now I would prefer to do everything with pencils, but here I mostly used watercolors. Watercolor is transparent, so I didn't cover this texture, and page look relatively well. And all the pages for the various houses for the Game of Thrones I did in the same way. Some are slightly better, some are a little bit worse. Of course, now I would prefer to work more on the animals, on the birds, maybe to make stronger contrast. But anyway, still I love that I did so many pictures here. And this book is quite close to be finished one day, I hope. This one is probably the worst among all of them. I don't think that I did the right choice for them. Ornament here, maybe I just didn't like the ornament which they added around the sun, so that's definitely not my favorite. And the dragon page for Targaryen family I definitely love. I'm glad that I decided to do almost a black, very dark grey background. All the parts of the dragon and golden parts, they look quite nice against the dark background. I even tried to do a very intense, like a reddish maroon color for the wood here. So I tried to experiment. Well, it's one of the most complicated, most frightening parts pages in this book, but I am glad that I finally started to color portraits here. And here we have two pictures which I did this year, and I am extremely proud of them. I included them into my top 10 best finished pictures video, which I filmed a couple of days ago. For both of them I used watercolor and then pencils, mostly polychromos. Of course, on the Sansa page I used bigger amount of watercolor to do the sky, then walls of the castle and huge areas of snow. It's much easier with watercolor. Of course, I also used gouache to create impression of the falling snow and to mask excessive black lines, to cover everything inside of the castle with a layer of snow. And of course I needed a white paint on the here on the wolf, because her wolf, she was almost white, so it has a little bit of gray and beige, but I tried to add a lot of white paint. And then I worked on her clothes. It was also tricky because I wanted to maintain color palette, and her family color, it was this blue, so I used it also for on flags and on her coat. Good thing that because here I use pencils, there is a difference in textures between matte watercolor and a little bit more shiny areas here. It was first difference which helped her a little bit to pop up against the blue background, and also I decided to add this lighter green for some of the highlights, and I think that it was a good decision. It definitely helped her, at least her dress, to be the light area here, and of course her hair helps to attract attention to her face. So I am really proud of this page. It was very intimidating. This one I always wanted to color. You know how much I love to color steel, armor and knights. So when I finally felt confident that I am ready to color such a beautiful armor with a lot of golden decoration attached to it, so I started it. Of course, I also added some leather details here. I used here watercolor only for the sky and as a first layer on the flags, because I was too lazy to cover this area with pencils. And the rest, it's all pencils. Here on the flowers I deliberately tried to use bigger amount of various pinks and to save yellow for his coat and for his armor. And I think that it's also quite decent work, at least I am proud of it also. You can see that I still need to color several portraits. Varys is one of my favorite characters from the story, so when I colored it I was nervous. I really wanted to make a good portrait, and I still think that I managed to do it. Here almost everything apart from his skin I did with a watercolor, even all those folds on his clothes. I do love how I did it with various shades of lilac and violet colors. You know that I am far from being very experienced at coloring with watercolor. I don't use it very frequently, but somehow in this book I managed to do some nice coloring with watercolors. I am quite content with myself, and it helped me in many things. Here I have Daria Harris, and I was so disturbed by the idea that I actually need to do blue hair and blue bird that I decided to cheat a little bit, and it's actually black with a little bit of bluish undertone to it. At least now he doesn't look ridiculous, and with black bloom he looks better. Here again I used almost everything with watercolor, and then on top of watercolor I worked with pencils to add contrast. Here I think that I used blend of pencils on the watercolor layer. I quite frequently use my set of Kohinoor Monteluz watercolor pencils. They are also good on this paper. Now I would prefer to mask some of the black lines on the golden silk of his coat. Maybe it would be favorable here, because if we would mask black here, it would attract more attention to the black armor. But still, I like it, so for the yearly works, it's definitely not bad, and I do love the armor, the steel parts. Another one colored almost completely with watercolors. I think that if I added something with pencils, maybe it's just to increase some of the shadows here, but 95% was made with watercolor, and you can recognize that it's Tomislav Tomic drawings. When I did it, I didn't have any books by Tomislav, Zemlya Snova or Villain Sun, so that was a page when I fall in love with the Tomislav style, and I'm still proud how I managed to color everything here with watercolors. The background, where it's slightly darker near the horizon line, I even added some shapes of the bushes probably here. Then it starts to have less intense color and very light near the upper part of the sky. Also, I tried to add shape to the trees so they wouldn't look flat, and of course I experimented which colors from my watercolor set I can blend to create a very light shadows on the snow. So it was interesting coloring, and I remember that I was extremely proud of myself when I finished it. This one, it's not good. I don't think. I actually do love how I did horse. I am not happy with the background. Something went not really well. From the beginning I didn't like those lines which represented probably some kind of clouds, but they didn't inspire me, and something went wrong when I selected background colors. And his skin, it's also not the best. I don't know. Everything is too dull, too messy. Even his clothes here. Anyway, we can't have everything in perfect state. This one, it was tricky because when I did it, I didn't have any experience how actually to color fire, how to color smoke around all those fires. So I tried to learn, I tried to practice some of the areas which I didn't know how to do with watercolor. I did with pencils, like their golden mask, the skin, and on the clothes of them I also worked with watercolors first and then with pencils. Maybe now I would change their coats. Maybe I wouldn't do them with two colors. Maybe they are too motley for me now. This checkered texture, it distracts attention from the masks. I would attract more attention to the masks. Maybe I would do them in more intense golden colors, because now intensity of this yellow is slightly stronger comparing to golden here. But still, as I said, I have here many works when I did something for the first time, and as a first work, it's not bad. Here it was one of my first successful attempts to color texture of the fur and falling snow. From the beginning it was complicated because we have a lot of snow, a lot of strange lines which I tried to convert maybe into the layers of snow. I masked them with white paint, and to color this giant wasn't very easy when we need to do transition from skin into fur. But the mammoth, he is quite adorable. I do love his eye and how I did texture here. It was my first page here, which I did with Inktense, and of course it has my uh, main problem when I just started to color. The contrasts, they are not strong enough. You can see that all colors, they have almost the same darkness. Now, of course, I would prefer to do maybe more intense colors on the foreground and something like source of the light somewhere behind, trying to do more intense rays of light coming from there. Or maybe I needed to do more intense bark on the tree. Anyway, now I would prefer to work with stronger contrast with more intense shadows. But as coloring with ink tents, it was a good attempt, and on this paper they also worked really well. So this one is worse comparing to the previous one. I was so invested into doing all those leaves that I didn't work well on the idea of the rays of light coming through the rays. I tried to do some masking using first oil pastel, trying to draw those rays of light, and then on top of it I worked with watercolor paints. You know that on the layer of oil pastel watercolor it doesn't stick, so these areas they remain light. But maybe I added too much of the rays. They don't look natural. Maybe I just had to add couple of rays of lights coming through the leaves and it would be better. But I wanted to highlight the face on the tree and the magician probably. Anyway, the picture was complicated, very difficult to color for the beginner. Then I was really confused of all the green colors which I tried to blend to get more realistic looking greens. So when I started to work here on the leaves, maybe I also had to color them as a mess, not trying to color each individual leaf. I don't know, but I don't like it. This one is better. The page itself is nothing very special, but I used a lot of watercolor first and then on the walls of the Winterfell I added more intense, more defined shadows using grays from Prismacolor set, and now it's not bad. You can see that again. Now I would say that shadows, contrasts, they are not strong enough. There is no difference between buildings which are far from us, closer to us, not enough shadows here on the lower part of the hill. But I tried to learn, and at least now I can analyze my pictures and to see where I could do better. But you know that I never correct my pictures, so I prefer to leave them as they are. That was the first page when I tested how watercolor behaved here, and I was so pleasantly surprised. And you may laugh, but before I saw that on YouTube lady colored in this book using watercolor, I actually didn't realize that I can use my old sets of watercolor which I owned for many years but I hadn't touched, that I actually can try to find them and to use for my new hobby, for my coloring. So I found my old sets of paints and I tested them here and I was very happy. I don't know why I hadn't finished this one. It's beautiful, it's by Tomic. I started to do something here on the walls. I didn't like color which I selected for the Golden City and I somehow abandoned it. Well, I hope that one day I will return. It's another very instructive page where I did water of the seawater for the first time and I tried to do this very dramatic sky. Well, maybe now I would do all those buildings with lighter color so they will stand better against the intense color of the background, but the rest of the page I do love. Oh, this one I like because when I decided to color it, I wanted to play on the contrast, to do a very light, very delicate, probably morning sky. You can find here a little bit of blue, pastel lilac, pastel pink, a little bit even cream, and then more sinister ruins of this castle. I hope that you can see that we have something like blood coming from the top parts of the towers. I deliberately used very dark black red colors here, so indeed I hope that it looks sinister. So this one is not bad. Apart from this tree, which I completely ruined with watercolor, I don't like how it looks. But at least now it doesn't distract attention from the upper part, which is much more important for the idea of this page. Another one which I don't like, I don't know, I have mixed feelings. I didn't like the initial page. It was difficult to say what exactly we have here. There were a lot of black lines already on the sky, too much for me. Then those strange mountains, probably. Then the structure of the castle also messed up together with dragons. So the initial drawing was a little bit messy, and I was crazy with colors here. Well, I a little bit regret that I did this one quite early. Now I am sure that I would do it better, but still, it was a big pleasure to color it. And you know, it's one of my biggest dreams to be able finally to visit Spain and this beautiful place which was used for filming this part in the film. I don't know, but every time when I hope to visit Spain, something happens. You know that what happened the last years, but I still hold my hopes that one day I will be able to visit Spain and all its beautiful places, including this one. So here again it's a mix of watercolor and pencils. It's a little bit too motley. Again, I didn't work well on the difference of colors for the buildings which are far from us and closer to us. And because of the many colors which I used here on the wall, it also looks a little bit too motley, probably too bright, too many colors. But still I have very warm feelings toward all the pictures here, because when I did all those pictures, I did them at my maximum of my skills. I always invested a lot into them, so if I did them, it was my maximum level of the coloring skills at the moment. I never did anything just to color and to forget. I really wanted all pictures here to be beautiful. Sometimes I was more successful, sometimes I was less successful, but at least I am proud of my efforts. Here I used a lot of Derwent drawing pencils together with regular, I think that I even used color softs. For the water and for the sky, I tried to use more gray-blue colors to represent that here we actually are on the northern part and everything is quite cold. Page again was a little bit too complicated with so many people here, but I decided that with these wooden details I will try to attract at least some of the attention to the warriors which we have on the foreground. Oh, this one is totally crazy. I decided that if the main story here was about this green light, then okay, I will use crazy color combo for the green, so it definitely would look magical. And on top of green I even added a golden watercolor to make it even more shiny and sinister looking. So it's crazy, but I do love it. Here I experimented again with various pencils. I think that I used some of the Prismacolors and some of Kohinoor Mondeluz. This dragon I do love. The background behind, I'm not sure. But I think that maybe if I would do a little bit more darker areas on the area, it would be much better. But anything else I do love. And probably I had to mask more of the black lines on the sky. It would be more favorable for the dragons. Oh, again, I was very proud when I finished this one, because the wolf. It's almost completely done with watercolors. I finally got myself very thin brush, so I was able to do texture individual hairs here with very thin brush. And I finally managed to blend right color to do shadows on the snow. And I do love this contrast between a very intense indigo blue, indifferent blue, violet blue, dark violet, which I used on the background, and relatively light colors on the shadows on the snow. A very wintry page. This one, it's not bad, even if the beginning I wasn't happy how I did the background. Somehow the gray which I selected wasn't very attractive. I started to add blue into it, so it was a little bit messed up. Then I decided to turn it into a rain page, so I tried to add texture of rain with a white paint. Maybe it's not very visible on the screen, but there are lines which for me represented rain. But it was a lot of fun to work on the carved gargoyle statue here, on the texture of the snow, and I tried to make it slightly different for the column and here for the statue. And I think that it was one of my first successful attempts when I tried to add additional colors to the black feathers. Not only black, but also a little bit of purple, a little bit of blue, to make feathers less flat and the whole bird figure more interesting to look at. Here I wanted to do very dramatic look, and I do love how I did water here. The background also is not bad, maybe too many colors which I used, but I needed to mask black lines, so I had to use a lot of white paint for it. And again, I don't think that I used a lot of pencils here, maybe just for the tiniest details to color them, but the 95% again done with watercolor. This one was a little bit intimidating because I didn't know how to start working on all those swords on the Iron Throne, but then I selected my basic colors for the iron. I remember that I probably did some underpaint with watercolor, but mostly I used with several shades of gray pencils. So I just needed patience to do all the steel details and then to add bright golden parts. And then as a prize for myself, I did the warrior here, and here I was finally able to play with bright colors. I do love how I did this fabric, or maybe it's coat or fabric anyway, the very intense bloody dark red. It helps to add some dramatic touch to the page. Again, here it's a blend of pencils and watercolors. I definitely could be more working more on the smoke here, but anything else it's quite good. For me it was challenging to work on the grape, on the old paper, on the gold, on the leather, on the fabric, on the old paper, so I learned a lot during coloring in this book, both with coloring with watercolor and pencils. Here I even added some kind of the landscape behind the window, and the only thing I dislike here is that beneath the table I definitely had to use much darker color to show the shadow beneath the table, and it would attract much more attention to the upper part of it and to the yummy things. I don't like that there is no difference in intensity of color, darkness of color on the pavement, on the stones and on the table. The rest it's not bad. Here we have another very complicated, very detailed page. Mostly here I used a watercolor first on the bigger areas, and then I started to work with everything with color softs, with Kohinoor Mondeluz, just to be able to do various shades of metal, both golden and steel, some leather part, various shades on the wood. It's also... Well, this one, it was totally ruined. I somehow decided when I got my sets of gold and pearl watercolors that they can be helpful here. And now I don't like how everything looked. I tried to maintain the original colors for the eggs, like colors of the future dragons. Something didn't work here. Maybe color which I selected for the inner part of the box here, the chest. Maybe I had to use darker color without this magenta, just to use the gold. Maybe I had to use darker color on the wood to create better contrast. I had to be more careful when I blended regular and golden watercolor, so this page I totally dislike. This one was complicated, and not because of the sword. The sword I worked with difficulties, but I looked at reference pictures and I tried to show both metal and leather parts of it. Mostly I used pencils, but then I had absolutely no idea which colors to use for the background, so I quickly did it with watercolor. I can't say that I like it, maybe because of this color which is similar to the steel, so it distracts attention from the steel. But at least this muted purple, it's not bad. And I do love reflection here on the steel. I definitely want to do this one. I already tried to start it a couple of times, still never have enough time. And it was my first coloring with regular pencils here. I already shown you my first with Inktense, and it was the second page which I did with color softs. I was absolutely unexperienced how to do all the wooden textures, and again you can see that there are almost no strong shadows, no difference between foreground background area which is behind, but I played with color combos. I learned my pencils, lighter and darker shades of blue, lighter and darker shades of gold, so for the beginner's page it's also not bad. I really very proud of everything I did here, and I have very warm feelings towards this book. I love it and I treasure it. And of course I have this bigger book, but here I don't have anything I can be proud of apart from one page. It's one and only which I did here. I really want to start coloring here. Now I feel much more confident, and I have bigger amount of media which I can use here, more appropriate colors of acrylic for the wood, like good selection of gray acrylics. I have gouache, so I will be able to mask some of the excessive lines. I hope that I will manage to do something in this book during the next year. But at least here I have this portrait, and I am glad how I did it. Again, you can see that mostly I paid attention to the steel, to the metal parts, but everything else, at least it's matching the style of the portrait. I managed to do it in limited color palette, and I do like how the small amount of red and orange added some dramatic touch here. Well, thank you for watching this part, and I hope that I won't be forgetting any more about very important books in my collection, and of course we move forward because I still have a lot of books.